Welcome to this week's Transport Chat. Now, before we get into the latest wheelings and dealings as far as state aid is concerned, I'd just like to ask you, the loyal viewer, a small favour. The transport sector is not the only one that's been exposed to the horrible impacts of the coronavirus. The media sector is no different. And Euractiv could really use your help. This is our 10th episode, which was meant to be a semi-regular thing. It's become a weekly rant and information dump to you, the loyal Transport Brief subscriber. We'd love to keep giving you this coverage and the content that I think you will kind of enjoy. There's no paywall. We want to keep it that way. If you check out the information in the video, in the brief, there'll be a link. If there's any kind of small donation you can make, we'll be extremely grateful. And we'll hopefully keep doing the things that, gives you the information you need. Let's crack on with the episode. So, state aid. The transport sector is in a bit of disarray at the moment because of planes being grounded, nobody's traveling anymore, tourism's on the edge. And despite the fact that a recovery plan is in the offing, times are tough. Now, let's break this down into the different transport types that we cover so thoroughly for you. In terms of airlines, the latest wheelings and dealings there are Lufthansa, one of the biggest airlines in Europe, is currently still talking to the German government about a big bailout, something like 9 billion euros. The big stumbling block is that the German government wants a certain amount of oversight on how Lufthansa spends that money, recovers, who it employs, bonuses, the size of its fleet, all of this kind of thing. And obviously Lufthansa doesn't want that because it's its own company. It's not a state-owned company after all. And the CEO of Lufthansa, Carsten Spohr, was in Brussels last week because Brussels Airlines is a subsidiary of Lufthansa. The Belgian government wants a similar kind of guarantees for it to get involved in state aid. So that is all going to play together in how Lufthansa goes forward, whether or not there'll be a deal today. Bear in mind that I filmed this not today, but a few days before, so things could have changed, although that is, from what I understand, unlikely. Because you can't give the German government one thing and the Belgian government another thing, can you? If you agree to a certain amount of conditionality for one, that opens the door for the other one. We're talking around 300 million euros with the Belgian government, 9 billion euros from the German government, so there's a difference there. But neither want these airlines to go bust. Lufthansa won't go bust. Brussels Airlines could without this state aid. But then there's, in terms of what do you get in return? Air France has already been asked to do a certain amount of sustainability tweaks from the French government. They're not as ambitious as they'd like you to think they are. Things like basically halving domestic air travel by 2024 is a step in the right direction as far as environmental concerns go. And that means that it opens the door for trains. But trains and rail companies are also not immune from the coronavirus's economic scythe. SNCF, the French railway company, they're on the lookout for a bailout. The government's considering that. Germany's railways, Deutsche Bahn is also on the lookout for a... So there will be a window for train travel to open up a window of opportunity in terms of short-haul flights and taking that part of aviation's market. The Financial Times, of all people, said in a recent article that intra-EU train travel cannot be more expensive than intra-plane travel in the future. I mean, this isn't a left-wing publication saying this. This is the Financial Times. So that's as far as railways are concerned. Now, the really interesting one at the moment is the automobile sector. Now, last week, 12 countries, Germany and France not included, wrote a joint letter saying that they want a dedicated automobile recovery plan within the huge trillion euro whatever plan that the European Union is working on. So just for the automobile sector. Also manufacturing countries like Slovakia, Slovenia, Czech Republic, these kind of things. Now, that's one thing. State aid is another thing. French government is one of the only ones to have so far granted to a specific company, to Renault, 5 billion. They made a huge deal about how Renault is a pioneer in terms of electromobility. European Commission said the same, that they'll help climate targets because Renault is known for making small, compact, more sustainable cars. Bruno Le Maire, France's finance minister, also said the same last week, that electric cars will be the priority from now on. So when they're considering state aid, that's what's going to happen. Their other main manufacturer, Peugeot, PSA Group, hasn't shown its hand yet, but they're also in the middle of pursuing a merger with Fiat Chrysler, which is supposed to be finalised by the end of this year or next year. Now, the last attempt at a big merger in Europe between car companies, Fiat Chrysler and Renault, ended in disaster because Renault is part owned by the French government, and there was a huge dispute about how this merger should be handled. Another alliance with Nissan got in the way, and it all fell apart. Fiat Chrysler went somewhere else. Now they're after Peugeot instead. So perhaps Peugeot will want to keep the state out of it as far as possible. A state aid bailout would certainly muddy the waters further. But Fiat Chrysler are in no such position. They've requested from the Italian government something like 6 billion guaranteed loan in order to ride out this period. The interesting thing is that Fiat Chrysler, despite having Fiat in the name, Fiat 500, Agnelli family, is a Dutch registered company for commercial purposes. They haven't asked the Dutch government for this bailout money, they've asked the Italian government. Italy was one of those 12 countries that asked for a dedicated plan. The Netherlands wasn't. The Netherlands doesn't really have a car industry. It is in the manufacturing supply chain, but aside from unknown cars like Spyker, I think they used to make planes as well, there's nothing to speak of. So, I mean, let's face it, the Netherlands is not going to give Fiat Chrysler 6 billion euros. Italy is probably going to give it 6 billion euros. But then again, is that the right way forward? You know, that's taxpayer money, 6 billion euros for a company that doesn't naturally pay its taxes in Italy. It's one to watch. And then in terms of where the sector goes from here, will countries start attaching sort of green conditions to car industry bailouts? The German car companies have already been on the phone with Angela Merkel several times. They want things like renewal schemes, scrappage schemes that would mean that people are buying cars more often. Would those be linked to climate targets? Peter Altmaier, Germany's economy minister, suggested that will be the case. Whether the European Union comes into this is anyone's guess. It's highly unlikely that the European Commission is going to be able to draft an EU-wide scrappage scheme, for example, in such short a time, or whether it would even want to wade into that argument. It's such a complex economic problem to solve. So at the moment, it's probably going to be down to what countries want, what they can get away with. I mean, where this all leaves the state aid scheme in the end, I mean, you've all seen the figures. There's been trillions of euros granted already in state aid, and half of that is from Germany. Will the European Commission seek to, how can we say this diplomatically, readdress any kind of accusations that it is too pro-Berlin by making clear that things like a Lufthansa bailout or maybe a Volkswagen bailout or whatever are not going to just get the green light just like that, even if the state aid framework has been relaxed. There's a lot riding on this. There's the Green Deal, there's the industry strategy, there's the idea of a two-speed Europe. I mean, if you start scrapping cars or renewing cars in Western Europe, as history has shown, they end up in Eastern Europe, where consumers have got less purchasing power and regulations are perhaps less strict. So it's a huge, huge ecosystem that can't just be solved by saying, right, you have to abide by this green target or this condition. So let's see what else, how deep the pockets really are. It'll be, watch out for the car industry makeup, railway companies as well, and then of course the airlines. They're the one to really look out for at the moment in terms of how big those bailouts are, what the conditions are, and whether or not governments actually want to save them or not. Thanks for watching, and thanks for considering my little plea to you at the beginning. Any little helps, and hopefully I'll see you next week as well. Ciao for now. Thanks for watching.